For our research project on qualitative research methods, me and Ben will be talking about mixed methods in qualitative research. The outline for our presentation, we will start with a general overview of mixed methods, detailing our manual that we will be using. Then we will explain a manuscript that uses mixed methods, and then compare that manuscript with the manual, and then evaluate how that manuscript about mixed methods aligns with Gephardt's 6 challenges. And then lastly, we will talk about how mixed methods is applied in IO psychology.
So first, let's introduce mixed methods. Majority of what we got from mixed methods came from Creswell 2009 and a YouTube video that we will link below. You'll be able to access. It basically goes through just him diving deeper into it and explaining different aspects of mixed methods. So what mixed methods is it uses quantitative and qualitative methods, but it does it in a way that it has specific designs, because a study can have both quantitative and qualitative, but that doesn't necessarily make it mixed methods. What it has to do is it has to have a design that's set up to use both of them in a way that answers the question or goes through the data to find out the information that is being sought. And so the thing with mixed methods is it's used because oftentimes questions in the psychological field are complex. We don't always know what we're looking for, especially in psychology, because things aren't necessarily visible. And so mixed methods is great because it helps with that aspect. It also helps dive deeper into questions. Oftentimes in psychology, we study theories, but those theories need to have applications. And mixed methods are great because it can help create theories, but also help find what applications can be used in order to use the theory successfully. As far as philosophy of science goes, it uses multiple. It would definitely use post-positive and constructivist, because depending on the design that you use, it's either trying to confirm something and get closer to what things really are, or it's considering the perspectives of people. It fits in. You could probably argue with every philosophy of science that fits in, but I would say it kind of fits somewhere between constructivist and post-positive. So here's the YouTube video. We'll link it below so that you can go check it out if you want to. So now we're going to go ahead and start talking about the manual that explains mixed methods, which comes from Creswell. So when looking at mixed methods, there are 4 main components to what makes mixed methods mixed methods. First is it collects both types of data. Next, with its using quantitative and qualitative methods, hence why it's called mixed methods. It goes in there, it gathers data from both different ends. It could be using survey questions, CQR. It could use, there's a bunch of different ways we can get qualitative. We just got it from this class. We learned all those things in this class. And then quantitative. So it uses both of those. Common ones could be like Likert scale versus survey data. That's a common one that we'll talk more about later in the presentation. But there are a variety of ways to do that. The next thing is it combines and or integrates a method for the design. And so that I'll go more into depth with. But basically, it's not just gathering the data, but it's having a specific design for using the methodology. And then lastly is framing the design. So these are what makes mixed methods, and not just doing quantitative and qualitative within the same study. So the first design that we look at is convergent design. This is when you take quantitative and qualitative data at the same time, and it leads towards an interpretation. This basically could be used to find how things kind of compare to each other. Just see like, hey, we have these quantitative pieces, we have these qualitative pieces. Like, do they actually kind of fit together? And are they saying the same things? So that's convergent. The next one is explanatory sequential, which this one is where you start with quantitative and then you use qualitative to understand your findings. So this one, you might go into organization and say, okay, we want to find job satisfaction. So what you do is you'll measure job satisfaction, and then you'll use qualitative piece to understand like what is causing their satisfaction or dissatisfaction or whatever. What's causing these results that you gathered from the quantitative research element. And so that all leads to an interpretation and explaining what the phenomenon is going on. And then the third one is exploratory sequential. This one's really important because oftentimes, especially in psychology, we don't always know what we're doing. We don't know. There might be scales that we're trying to gather or trying to create in different aspects, and we know there's probably something out there, but we're not quite sure what it is. And so the qualitative piece is used first, and then you're gathering collection, you're going through it, looking at your findings, and then from there you're creating data collection. You're just doing all these different things to create a scale. This could be personality. You do these surveys, you do these things, try to find out these kind of phenomena that's going on, and then you create a quantitative piece to fit in to the interpretation of everything. And so, yeah, again, this one's more exploratory, trying to find out these experiences. And this one would definitely be more on the critical ideology or the constructivist end of the scientific perspectives. And lastly, the frameworks. These are some examples. When you're using conversion design, this might be experiments where you're just testing to see if the qualitative piece and the quantitative piece are doing the same thing. For the explanatory, this is kind of like doing a social science theory where you gather the information and then you use the qualitative piece to kind of understand bits and pieces from that theory. Again, within the organization, you have the job satisfaction, and then you're using explanatory to understand it better. And then the third one would be community-based participatory research. So again, trying to get that constructivist or the critical ideology is trying to look at people's experiences and then try to gather data to match that.
Going off of this, we wanted to look at a manuscript that used mixed method design. So the manuscript that we chose was by Sarah McHone, which studied the meanings and opinions around rape in college student athlete culture. This study sought to capture the essence of rape myths that may not materialize through the use of quantitative surveys. So, as Ben mentioned, one of the designs that you can use in mixed methods is sequential explanatory design. So in this one, you start with a quantitative method and then you move to a qualitative method. So in this manuscript, the first phase was a quantitative survey where a survey was sent out to 205 sophomores and juniors at a large D1 public university in the Northeast. This survey contained two different scales. The first one was an identification of acquaintance rape attitude scale, which identified people's attitudes toward rape. And it also had a version of the Marlowe-Crown social desirability scale, which indicates response bias. The second phase was qualitative, and initially it had small focus groups where 9 sports teams were evenly distributed across the focus groups, as well as an even gender distribution within the focus groups. Additionally, they then used information from those focus groups to conduct follow-up individual interviews with the athletes in order to see if there was a difference in responses when the athletes were in a group setting versus an individual setting where they were one-on-one with the researcher. And then you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Perfect. So the results of the quantitative study showed that there was a very low acceptance of rape myths among the sample of student athletes. Many of the participants answered the survey in such a way that the researchers concluded that the majority of respondents felt that sexual coercion was wrong under all circumstances, and results showed that participants also disagreed with victim blaming statements. However, when looking at the qualitative focus groups and interviews, there were some differences from what we saw in the quantitative study. So, for instance, subtle yet pervasive rape myths that fell into 4 major themes were shown during the focus groups and interviews. The first one being a misunderstanding of consent, the belief in accidental or fabricated rape, such as saying that a woman is pretending that she was raped, the contention that some women provoke rape, such as through what they wear, and the invulnerability of female athletes, which was explained by female athletes in this study by their thought process that they were strong enough that this wouldn't happen to them. So the responses from the qualitative aspects reflected rape supportive attitudes and victim blaming statements. And as we see, there's a different story looking at the results from the quantitative survey and the qualitative focus groups and interviews, which this could be because the student athletes were maybe feeding off of or agreeing with their teammates when they were in a focus group. However, this likely isn't the case because they saw similar results when they were just on a one-on-one interview with a researcher. However, this study was conducted in 2004. So maybe if this study was conducted in present day where there's been an increased awareness among sexual assaults among college athletics, there may have been different results. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. Yes, that one. Thank you. So comparing and contrasting this study with our mixed method manual requirements, as I previously stated and Ben mentioned, in the manual, one aspect of mixed methods is sequential explanatory strategy, which was where you initially start with quantitative data collection and analysis. Then from there, you move on to qualitative data collection and analysis, and then you have an interpretation of the entire study. This design was similarly seen in our McCone study. One of the requirements of mixed methods philosophy of science is where quantitative research is used to gather numerical results, and then qualitative research allows us to dive deeper and gain insight into those results. Looking at our study that we highlighted, the philosophy of science shows that the quantitative results indicated the direction for qualitative data that they conducted during their interviews. However, there was a discrepancy between those two results. So, evaluating this manuscript against Gephardt's challenges, the first one is that this was not a one-off study. It was actually this research was part of a larger study in which information about sexual violence and student-athlete culture was collected from male and female sophomore and junior Division I student athletes at a large public university during the 2001-2002 school year, and it was a mixed method study. So this one is a follow-up to that. Additionally, this manuscript had an extensive literature review that gave background regarding rape culture and sexual violence, especially among collegiate athletes. There was a suggested statement of the goals and objectives. However, it was a little bit vague, so hard to tell. There was a clear and thorough construct definition, where there was clear definitions regarding rape myths, sexual violence within the student-athlete community. The methodology that was used in this study was specified through details regarding their recruitment strategies, the survey and measurement scales that were used, and the statistical analyses that were used. And additionally, the conclusion discussed an overall opinions of the student-athletes regarding rape culture and sexual violence, as well as outlined future implications for this type of study.
So now with all this being presented, how does this apply to an IO context? Well, within IO, a lot of times problems are complex. Companies can be as small as 5 people or can be as huge as Amazon, over 1 million people. There's so many different facets with culture and different aspects, and so mixed methods is great because it can help attack these complex problems. It's really good for exploratory research, trying to understand these different experiences that are occurring within organizations. It's also great for creating new scales because there's so many new things to study within organizations, and there's different ways to measure it, and so it's great for going through that. And then also, it's really good for actionable items, creating things that leaders can actually use within organizations to facilitate change and to have an impact. But one of the drawbacks is it can be more complex, and oftentimes data is not the easiest thing to come by within organizations, and the data that's already given isn't super clear, and so you have to kind of weigh that throughout using mixed methods. Is are you going to use this data that isn't super clear, um, and also the time that it takes to do anything that's qualitative in nature is definitely going to be a barrier within organizations. So an example of this applied to a specific example comes from Chambers and Frampton in 2022, where they looked at psychiatrists in New Zealand and they sought to understand the burnout, stress, and their intentions for leaving. And they wanted to use qualitative to understand these experiences. So for the quantitative piece, they used Likert scale items to address these different aspects, such as burnout and stress. And then they used survey questions to gauge their experiences, why these things were happening, kind of what was going on within these for the experiences of psychiatrists. So what they found was 1 in 3 psychiatrists felt these negative emotions within organizations, such as burnout, and they had intentions to leave. And a lot of the reasons were due to the high demands of the company and potential lack of support from managers and from other people that were above them within their work environment. And so the mixed methods approach measured what their experiences, and then found kind of the reasons for what was going on with them. This is an example of how it's applied successfully within organizations, and how using them can gain a better understanding of the problems within an organization.
As Ben mentioned, using mixed methods can be very complex and tedious. However, it allows us to gain a more complete and overall understanding of the research because we're looking at it from both a quantitative and qualitative perspective. So, going back to our manuscript example, we saw that there was inconsistency between the opinions expressed during the quantitative survey and the qualitative focus groups. So if the researchers had just looked at one or the other, we wouldn't see that discrepancy among student athletes, and therefore they would have drawn false conclusions about student athletes' opinions. So in this way, using a mixed method result allowed them to have a better understanding of the student athletes' opinions in this study.
Yeah. And from what we can see from all of this is mixed methods is great in gaining a better understanding of things. It goes really well in depth, but then oftentimes it's not the best. It's not super simple. It's not just sending out a quick survey, getting like overall satisfaction, but it does gain great insight. It's kind of the best of both worlds, and it has its great uses when it's used correctly. So that's our presentation. And
yeah, and I wanted to wrap up just highlighting some of our authors. In light of what we found within our syllabus audit in class, where a majority of scientific research is written by cis white males, we wanted to include articles that were written by minority groups, such as female authors, in order to create a more culturally and socially responsive pedagogy. So thank you for listening to our presentation on mixed methods.